There is a specific kind of financial pain that no one talks about because the person experiencing it has been conditioned to feel ashamed of even noticing it. It isn't the pain of being reckless. It isn't the pain of bad decisions, bad investments, or bad luck. It is the pain of being the person everyone calls. The person who always figures it out, the one who never says no. The one who gives and gives and gives and then sits alone at the end of the month wondering why the numbers never move. You have been told your entire life that generosity is a virtue, that giving makes you worthy, that the universe rewards open hands, that real men provide, share, sacrifice, that saying no is selfishness dressed up in an excuse. And you believed it, not because you were stupid, because every institution that shaped you, your family, your religion, your culture, your community, repeated it so consistently that it became invisible. It stopped being a belief and became a lens. You don't see it. You see through it. What Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago that most people still haven't processed is this: generosity is not a virtue in itself. It is a tool. And like any tool, what matters is not whether you use it. It is whether you are the one holding it or the one it is being used on. He wrote in The Prince that a ruler who wishes to maintain a reputation for generosity will be ruined by it. Because in order to keep giving visibly, keep giving publicly, keep giving in the way that earns praise, he must eventually tax, extract, and take from those beneath him. He ends up despised. The appearance of virtue becomes the mechanism of destruction. That was written about princes and political power. But look at your own life right now and tell me it doesn't apply. Consider 2 men who existed in the same century, breathed the same European air, and had access to comparable wealth and power. Emperor Charles V ruled the Holy Roman Empire in the 1500s. He was the most powerful man on earth for decades. He funded wars for allies who barely remembered his name. He subsidized kingdoms that turned on him the moment it was convenient. He gave openly, governed generously, and was celebrated across the continent as a man of immense nobility. He died in a monastery in Spain in 1558, having bankrupted the most resource-rich empire in the world. He abdicated, exhausted, and spent his final years watching clocks and waiting to die. The wealth of an entire continent passed through his hands and left nothing behind. Cosimo de' Medici, the patriarch of the Medici banking dynasty in Florence, lived in the same era. He was not celebrated the way Charles was. He was feared, respected, and occasionally resented. He gave strategically. He funded artists and philosophers, not because he was moved by beauty, but because cultural patronage bought him influence that soldiers couldn't. He extended credit not out of charity but out of leverage. He never gave without knowing what the giving returned. When Cosimo died in 1464, his family controlled Florence. His name was still being invoked 200 years later. His legacy was not charity. It was architecture, structure, power that compounded. Charles gave from instinct. Cosimo gave from calculation. One of them left a monastery. One of them left a dynasty. This is the first thing you need to understand before anything else lands. Truth 1. The virtue trap. You were not taught to be generous because generous people thrive. You were taught to be generous because generous people are easier to manage. Think about where this lesson came from. It came from systems, religious institutions, family structures, social hierarchies that needed your cooperation to function. A person who gives freely does not negotiate. A person who sacrifices without asking what they get in return does not challenge the terms. A person who equates their worth with how much they provide for others will work harder, complain less, and ask for less in return. Generosity, as it is typically taught, is not a path to abundance. It is a compliance mechanism. It keeps the giving class giving and the receiving class receiving, and it frames any attempt to change that dynamic as a moral failure. This is not an argument against giving. Machiavelli was not arguing against generosity. He was arguing against the kind of generosity that hollows you out while the world applauds the shell. There is a version of giving that builds power. There is a version that destroys it. The difference is not the amount. The difference is whether the giving comes from strength or from fear, whether it is chosen or whether it is extracted. whether it moves you forward or whether it keeps you permanently in place. Most people reading this have never been given the option to choose. They were trained to give before they were old enough to know they had something worth protecting. And the training was so deep, so early, so woven into identity, into who they believe they are as a man, as a son, as a member of a community, that questioning it does not feel like thinking. It feels like betrayal. That is the trap. Not the giving itself, the identity wrapped around it. Truth, too, the invisible tax. Right now, somewhere in your life, there is a recurring withdrawal you are not fully accounting for. It may be a family member who calls with a problem that always ends with your money or your time. It may be a friend group where you are always the one who covers what others can't. It may be a relationship where your emotional labor, your presence, your resources flow one direction, and you have normalized that flow so completely that challenging it feels like an act of violence against someone you love. This is what Machiavelli called the cost of liberality. He didn't use the word drain. He used the language of political economy. But the principle is the same. Every resource you extend beyond your own foundation is a resource that cannot compound for you. Wealth is not just money. It is time, energy, attention, capital, and all of it follows the same law. What leaves your hands on someone else's schedule is no longer yours. The invisible part is this: you have been trained to see these withdrawals as normal, as your role, as proof of your character. You do not experience them as losses because you were taught to experience them as expressions of love. But your bank account does not speak in the language of love. Neither does your capacity for focused work. Neither does the mental energy you spend managing other people's problems instead of building your own position. Run an honest audit of the last 90 days, not of what you spent on yourself, of what you gave to others, money, time, emotional bandwidth that you did not choose freely but felt obligated to provide. Add it up. Not in guilt, in clarity. What you find will probably disturb you, because it will not be a small number. And it will have happened without dramatic moments, without obvious exploitation. It will have happened through 1,000 small transactions, each of which felt reasonable in isolation, each of which was entirely unreasonable as a pattern. That pattern is the tax. It is invisible because you have been paying it so long you stopped seeing it as a cost. You started seeing it as the price of being who you are. The first move toward financial freedom, for many people in this audience, is not an investment. It is a recognition. What is leaving your life without your full, conscious, uncoerced permission? Truth 3. The guilt economy. Here is something that took a long time to understand, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The people who drain generous people are rarely villains. They are not calculating. They are not sitting somewhere designing a strategy to extract from you. They are something far more difficult to deal with. They are helpless. Or more precisely, they have learned to perform helplessness so effectively that the performance has become real. They have discovered, usually early in life, that projecting need is the most reliable way to activate the people around them. And they have built an entire relationship with the world around that discovery. You are not dealing with greed. You are dealing with dependency that has been validated, reinforced, and emotionally rewarded every single time someone like you showed up and solved the problem. This is what makes the guilt economy so difficult to escape. Greed, you can refuse. Neediness, you were trained to respond to as an emergency. Someone being hungry feels like your moral responsibility. Someone being lost feels like your obligation to guide them. Someone being stuck feels like your failure if you walk away. Machiavelli understood this mechanism in the context of political power. He wrote that men are moved more by fear of loss than by hope of gain. The people performing helplessness around you are not stupid. They have, consciously or not, located the specific emotional lever that moves you. Guilt, obligation, love, loyalty, and they apply it with precision every time they need something. The practical question is not whether they are bad people. Most of them are not. Some of them genuinely need help. But there is a difference between someone who needs help and someone who has decided that you are the permanent solution to a problem they have no intention of solving themselves. Machiavelli's coldest lesson was this: you cannot save people who have decided that needing saving is their role. What you can do is decide whether their role requires your permanent participation. That decision is not cruelty. It is the prerequisite for your own survival. Truth 4. The reputation illusion. There is a social reward for being generous, and it is real enough that it functions as a trap. When you are the one who always helps, you are liked, you are needed. You are spoken well of. You receive a form of social warmth that feels like respect, but is actually something closer to appreciation for a service. People are glad you exist because you make their lives easier. That is not the same as being valued. It is the same as a good tool being valued. Machiavelli was precise about this. He wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, because love is conditional on what you provide, while fear is structural. He was not advocating cruelty. He was describing the difference between a relationship built on what you offer and a relationship built on who you are. The generous person is loved because of the offering. Remove the offering and watch what remains. You may have experienced a version of this already. The moment you said no for the first time, the moment you couldn't show up, couldn't give, couldn't solve the problem, and you noticed something. The warmth cooled. The calls got shorter. The dynamic shifted in a way that revealed, quietly and unmistakably, that what was being celebrated was not you. It was your availability. Being known as the generous one is a reputation that costs you continuously and pays you almost nothing back in real terms. It does not convert into opportunities. It does not convert into loyalty. Real loyalty, the kind that shows up when you are the one who needs something. It converts into expectation, and expectations compound just like debt. Every time you meet the expectation, you raise the baseline. Every time you exceed it, you make the next time feel like the minimum. You are not building goodwill. You are inflating a currency that only you are required to keep printing. The Medici understood this. Their patronage was not charity. It was public positioning. They chose what to fund, what to refuse, who received their name and under what terms. The reputation was not for generosity. It was for discernment. And discernment commands a different kind of respect entirely, one that does not require you to keep paying to maintain it. Truth 5. Machiavelli's calculated giving. This is where the conversation shifts from diagnosis to architecture. Machiavelli's position was not that you should stop giving. It was that you should stop giving in ways that cost you more than they return, financially, politically, socially. He distinguished between two modes of liberality. The first he called true liberality, giving in ways that generate real influence, real loyalty, real structural advantage. The second he called the illusion of liberality, giving publicly, generously, emotionally, in ways that feel virtuous but produce nothing durable. The distinction matters because the calculation is different in each case. When Cosimo de' Medici funded Brunelleschi's dome for the Florence Cathedral, he was not moved by religious devotion alone. He understood that funding an architectural achievement no one else could finance made Florence his city culturally in a way that no political appointment could. He gave something real. He received something permanent. When you help someone build a skill, solve a specific problem, access a connection that actually changes their position, you are giving in a way that compounds. When you give because you cannot bear the discomfort of saying no, because you need them to think well of you, because you fear what happens to the relationship if you stop, you are paying a tax, not making an investment. The difference between these two acts looks the same from the outside. The money or time or energy moves in the same direction. The internal structure is completely different. Giving from calculation is not coldness. It is respect for yourself, for the recipient, for the transaction. It treats resources as finite, which they are. It treats your future as something worth protecting, which it is. It treats other people as capable of handling a no, which they are. Giving from guilt treats your resources as though they are owed. It treats your future as less important than the immediate comfort of the person in front of you. And it treats the recipient as too fragile to encounter your limits, which is, if you think about it, a form of contempt wearing the mask of kindness. The practical framework Machiavelli implies is this. Before any significant act of giving, money, time, energy, access, ask 3 questions. What does this cost me at the level of my own position? What does this return specifically and realistically? And is the person receiving this more capable of meeting their own need than they are presenting? 3 honest answers will tell you whether you are investing or whether you are being extracted from. Truth 6. The poverty of approval. This is the most personal truth in this video. And it is the one most people will resist because it requires looking at something that is not comfortable to see. Most people who are chronically overgenerous are not primarily motivated by love of others. They are motivated by fear of what happens when the giving stops, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being seen as selfish, the fear of being alone in a way that feels permanent and deserved. They are not giving money. They are buying a feeling of being needed. And being needed is a substitute, an expensive, exhausting substitute for being genuinely wanted. Carl Jung called this the persona problem. The mask you build to manage how others see you eventually becomes a prison. The man who has built his entire identity around being the provider, the helper, the one who never lets anyone down, he is not free. He cannot afford to be human in the ways that matter. He cannot be tired, cannot be needy, cannot say, I am struggling right now and I need to stop. Because the moment he stops performing the role, he is terrified there will be nothing underneath it that people will stay for. This fear keeps the money flowing out. It keeps the time disappearing. It keeps the emotional bandwidth perpetually depleted, not because of the people asking. Because of what you have decided their asking means about your value. Machiavelli had no language for psychology, but he had language for this. He wrote that a man who needs to be loved by everyone is a man who can be moved by anyone. Neediness, even disguised as generosity, is a vulnerability. It is a lever that anyone who understands you can use. The hardest work here is not financial. It is not a strategy or a calculation. It is the recognition that you have been using your resources to purchase something that cannot be purchased, that the approval you are chasing through giving is not the kind that fills you, that the people whose love you are trying to buy with generosity already know, on some level, that what they receive from you is not free. They are just pretending not to know because the arrangement suits them. Real value in relationships does not require constant payment to maintain. If it does, what you have is not a relationship. It is a transaction where you are always on the losing side. Truth 7. Strategic withdrawal. Everything in this video could be heard as an argument for becoming cold, becoming closed, becoming the person who gives nothing and calculates everything. That would be a misreading. What Machiavelli was describing and what this entire framework points toward is not the removal of generosity. It is the reclamation of it, the process of taking something that was extracted from you without your full understanding and deciding, consciously, on your own terms, what it now means and how it moves. Strategic withdrawal does not mean announcing to everyone in your life that things are changing. It does not mean a dramatic confrontation, a speech, a declaration. It means a quiet, graduated, deliberate reduction in the automatic giving, the giving you do on reflex, on guilt, on schedule, replaced by a giving that you choose, when you choose it, in the amount you choose, for reasons you have actually examined. This is more difficult than it sounds. Because the people around you have built their expectations around your previous behavior, and when the automatic giving slows, they will feel it. Some of them will name it. Some of them will apply pressure, emotional or otherwise. Some of them will reframe your withdrawal as a change in your character, a betrayal, a sign that you have become someone else. They are not wrong that you have changed. But the change is not the corruption of your character. It is the first time your character has had room to exist independent of what you give. Machiavelli's counsel here is the most practical thing he ever wrote. He said that the injuries you must do to others should be done all at once so that people taste them less. The same principle, applied with far less severity, applies here. Do not reduce your giving in a way that creates endless small conflicts over a long period. Make the shift clearly, calmly, and do not backtrack, not because you owe people a clean break. Because you owe yourself consistency, the specific mechanics matter less than the internal clarity. Know what you are withdrawing from and why. Know what you are choosing to give, moving forward, and on what terms. Hold that clarity even when the pressure comes, and it will come. Over time, what happens is not that your relationships collapse. The ones that were purely transactional will cool or end. Those are not losses, even if they feel like them initially. What remains is something different. Relationships that can tolerate your limits. People who stay not because of what you provide, but because of who you are when you are not performing provision. That is not a smaller life. It is a more real one, and the financial consequence over time is not subtle. The resources that were leaking, the money, the time, the energy, begin to accumulate, not dramatically, quietly, in the way that compound interest works, which is to say invisibly at first and then undeniably. You begin to build from a base that is not constantly being eroded. You begin to think about your own future in a way that is not immediately interrupted by someone else's present. That shift is not a betrayal of generosity. It is the first time you have been in a position to practice it honestly. There is something this video has not told you, and it is worth naming. What you have learned here is how not to be extracted from. How to recognize the systems that were running on your resources without your real consent. How to stop giving from fear and start, slowly, giving from something more solid. But the men who built lasting influence, the Medicis, the strategists, the builders whose names survived centuries, they did not just stop giving carelessly, they became capable of giving massively, on their own terms, at the moment of their own choosing, from a position of such strength that the giving cost them nothing essential and returned them everything that mattered. That version of generosity is not what you were taught. It is not the generosity of someone who cannot say no. It is the generosity of someone who has so thoroughly secured their own position that giving becomes an act of power rather than an act of loss. You are not there yet. Neither was Cosimo when he started. Neither was anyone who built something real. But you cannot get there from where you were. You can only get there from here. From the moment you stopped giving away something you hadn't finished building yet. Most people will keep giving until there's nothing left and call it kindness. You now know what it actually is.